There once was an orphan who lived in an orphanage. He grew up with other orphans, but there was one thing that set him apart from the rest. That thing was his unusual name, which was given to him by his biological parents before they died. His parents were foreigners who had come to this country for business when they learned they were expecting a child. They stayed in the city where they met, gave birth to the baby boy, and named him Theo. But soon after the baby's birth, both parents died unexpectedly of a sudden illness, leaving the infant Theo all alone. The local church took care of the adoption process and brought the baby to the orphanage. The director of the institution was shocked when she first heard the name of the new arrival. She couldn't remember ever having a child with such an unusual name. She didn't even know anyone in the staff who had ever heard of a Theo. So that's how the strange name stayed with the boy all his life. And he liked his name because it was unique. Unlike the other orphans, Theo wasn't neglected or mistreated by his parents. In fact, he was doted upon, loved, and cherished by both of them until their death. So it was hard for Theo to grow up into a polite and respectful young man who was always ready to help others. Theo felt great empathy towards the other orphans in the institution. He understood that most of them suffered from neglect and maltreatment by their parents, which is why they became orphans. So Theo tried to be a good friend to all of them, lending a helping hand whenever possible. As time went by, Theo grew up and finished high school. He received a scholarship to study at a prestigious university, which made him very happy. He was finally able to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor and helping people in need. The director of the orphanage was extremely proud. Theo. She saw him as a shining example of what an orphan could become if given enough love and care. Unfortunately, not all the other employees shared her opinion. One of them, a woman named Gertrude, was the head of the finance department. She hated Theo with all her heart, and there's a simple explanation for that. Gertrude wanted all the orphans under her evil influence to call her Mother Gertrude, even though none of the children did so, except when they needed something from her. Gertrude insisted that Mother Gertrude was a title well-deserved, since it was her who fed the kids, dressed them, and put a roof over their heads. In fact, no one at the orphanage knew who the motherly figure was, since most of the staff were men, including the director, and everyone was too busy with their own lives to care for the orphans. They often forgot that they even existed. So Gertrude tried to take advantage of the situation. But Theo never bowed to her tyranny. He refused to call her Mother Gertrude and treated her just like any other employee. This angered the old woman even more. She swore to herself that she would make Theo pay for his disrespect. And she started planning her revenge. When Theo found out about her plans, he tried to avoid her as much as possible. But Gertrude was persistent and always managed to cross his path. Sometimes she would deliberately pour coffee on his books, then sneer at him. Oops. Sorry, Dr. Theo. You see? I'm not your mother, so I don't have to worry about your future. Other times, she would ask him for favors, which he usually did without hesitation. But each time he did so, she would say, Well, looks like Mother Gertrude is more important than you thought, Dr. Theo. Her words infuriated him. But instead of confronting her, which would only cause trouble, he decided to endure and wait for the day he could finally move out and start his own life. Finally, that day came. Theo graduated from university and got a job at a clinic. It was far from being the best workplace, but it paid the bills. Plus, Theo was determined to get some experience and then find a better job. He moved into a small but cozy apartment and started saving money. A year later, he managed to buy a nice car and improve his living conditions. He still had to work hard, but now he was happy with his progress. However, fate had other plans for him. One morning, Theo was driving to work when suddenly a woman ran onto the road. He slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. He hit the woman, and she fell to the ground, unconscious. Theo immediately called an ambulance and rushed her to the hospital himself. At the reception, he introduced himself as the person who found the woman and asked the staff to save her. However, the nurse only looked at him in surprise and said, "Oh, Mr. Theo, is that really you? What are you doing here?" It turned out that the woman lying on the stretcher was Gertrude. Theo was shocked to hear that the rude old woman from the orphanage had a name. No one at the orphanage had ever called her by it. They simply called her Gertrude. Soon, the doctors diagnosed Gertrude with a concussion and several fractures. She had to stay in the hospital for a while. Theo visited her every day to inquire about her health and find out if there was anything he could do to help. To his surprise, Gertrude was very grateful for his concern. For the first time, she even called him by his name instead of using his full name and said thank you sincerely. After being discharged from the hospital, Gertrude visited Theo at home. She explained to him that she didn't have anyone else to turn to, since all her relatives died long ago. She had worked at the orphanage for over 30 years and considered it her life's work. But it turned out that the higher management had completely different plans for her. They wanted to hire younger staff and fired her. Not only that, but they also denied her medical insurance, which was supposed to cover her retirement. Theo felt sorry for the old woman. He remembered how she used to humiliate him at every opportunity. And suddenly he realized that she might be lonely and need someone to talk to. So he invited her to stay with him. At first, Gertrude refused, but later agreed. She moved into Theo's house and he took care of her as if she were his own grandmother. Soon, Gertrude recovered and even got a new job at the local grocery store. She was very grateful to Theo for his help and never again said a word against him. Meanwhile, the other orphans at the orphanage continued to suffer from the lack of attention and care. One day, Theo decided to visit them. When he entered the building, the children stopped playing and stared at him. Some of them were hiding behind the other children, while others looked at Theo with undisguised hostility. He greeted them politely and asked how they were doing. One girl from the group finally spoke up. "What do you want? You've become successful and don't care about us anymore," she shouted at him. "We can see very well that you do want to meet us, and you're really just trying to make yourself feel better by coming here from time to time. Don't think we don't understand that you're just pretending to be kind?" Theo was deeply hurt by her words. But before he could respond, another boy chimed in. "Yeah, you don't need to pretend anymore. We all hate you, and we know you hated living here just as much as we do. So don't bother coming back. You won't find any understanding here." Hearing these words, Theo felt tears pricking at his eyes. It was the first time in his life that he had ever been hated for no reason. He couldn't believe that these words were being said to him by the same children he had helped and supported for so many years. But then something amazing happened. A little girl stepped forward and said, "No, it's not true." Theo was the kindest of all the people who worked there. He was the only one who never said a bad word to us, who always listened to us and offered a helping hand whenever he could. The other children gasped in surprise. They had never heard anyone say such nice things about Theo.
One of them asked hesitantly,
"You really think so?" The little girl nodded vigorously. "Of course I do! Why wouldn't I think so? Theo is the best." Then she added softly, "I think he's the only one who truly cared about us." Theo was deeply moved by the girl's words. He hugged her and said, "Thank you. I'm glad I could be a good friend to you." And so, Theo continued to visit the children at the orphanage, bringing them not only gifts, but also warmth and kindness. As for Gertrude, she spent her remaining years surrounded by love and care, realizing that even in old age, one could find happiness and understanding.